Hello, friends, and welcome to the July 10th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Outreach Director, and today's episode is being brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas. And today we are excited to be joined by Sister Quincy Howard, Government Relations Specialist with Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice. We're going to be talking about voting as part of our series highlighting speakers with the Washington Interfaith Staff Community, or WISC. But before we do that, I have a couple of reminders for this week. So here in Texas, it is election time. As we are recording on Friday, July 10th, we're in the midst of the final day of early voting in the primary runoff elections. Election day is Tuesday, July 14th. If you have questions about mail-in voting, we've been promoting that for the last couple of weeks. So if something's not going well for you, we have a one-pager on our website, hopefully answering your questions, or you can reach out to me at scott@texasimpact.org. Whether you voted by mail in this election or not, we hope that everyone 65 plus will apply to vote by mail for November. So if you've yet to do so, that is your homework assignment for today. We want to make sure that as many people as possible are voting safely and saving line space for people who have to show up in person. While you're on the website, texasimpact.org, we hope that you'll check out our Texas Faith Votes campaign. We hope that you will covenant with other Texans to organize your community to pledge to vote and vote safely by mail for those who are eligible. Go to texasimpact.org and click on the voting link. Take the pledge. Tell elected officials that you plan on voting on the basis of health, climate, immigration, and non-discrimination, and that you make that pledge to vote, and find more resources about recruiting poll workers and voting by mail. So, y'all, between pandemics, protests, and hard policy conversations, 2020 has been a crazy year. But we hope that Texans of faith will stay active and engaged in our advocacy and at the ballot box. So we hope that you'll keep pressing forward together. Please let me know if you have questions or if Texas Impact can support your work. You can reach me at scott@texasimpact.org. So with all of that being said, I am excited to welcome to the conversation Sister Quincy Howard. How are you today?
I am fine. It is great to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me to talk on your podcast.
And we were talking before we started recording about the fact that you are a native Texan. And so we're excited to have as many Texans as possible come on the show. Thanks for being with us today. So before we jump in, there's a lot going on in the world. How are you feeling?
I am feeling, I have a heavy spirit because of everything that is happening. It's hard to believe that we are just moving into part 2 of 2020. That's a daunting idea. But I'm also feeling quite hopeful. Particularly the developments over the last couple of months have really inspired me and given me hope about the prospects of rebuilding once we are, as a nation, move through this.
Well said. I think many of us are feeling the exact same way. So many of our listeners might not be aware of Network Lobby. What should we know, and how do you work with other faith partners through WISC?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice was started in the early 70s, and it was actually an idea that grew out of a summit of a coalition of Catholic sisters. So based on Vatican II call to try to address the root causes of poverty and suffering, they got together to think through what does that mean in the 20th century. And what the idea they came up with was the best way to get at the root causes of poverty is to change federal policy, to try and make it more responsive to the needs of the people. And they started Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice, and almost 50 years later, being on the staff, I've been pretty amazed at the clout that has been built on Capitol Hill and the recognition of Network Lobby as a unique voice in the lobby sphere, let's call it. And with WISC, the Washington Interfaith Staff Community has really been a highlight of my experience over the last 3 years working at Network. Sister Simone Campbell, who is our executive director, is actually also one of the co-chairs of WISC. So Network is very, very invested in coalition work in general. And what I have learned through my work with WISC and some of they have working groups set up to focus on specific issue areas at the federal level. And through my work with different working groups, I've really learned how powerful it is to have a diverse set of faith voices come together to speak to an issue and advocate for solutions. It's a unique voice. We can get a foot in the door on both sides of the aisle. And for faith-based organizations that maybe aren't as big or have as much of a history as Network, it allows them to also come into the conversation and have their voices heard as well. So it's really a win-win situation for all of the groups involved. And it also pushes forward our advocacy issues in a really great way. I would say Faithful Democracy, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. Faithful Democracy is one of those working groups in the WISC umbrella coalition. And we are really at a point that we're ready to build on the existing structure, expand that coalition, start working with states, because we know that the democratic system, so much of the work is going to be at a state and local level. So it's an exciting time for the Faithful Democracy group in that we are expanding our outreach and building an infrastructure to really get to some federal level advocacy work come 2021.
So the first conversation you and I had, a couple of months ago now when we were preparing for this series, we talked about this summer being a good time to talk about voting. I think at that point we thought that maybe the next stimulus bill would have already passed, but alas, we still wait. So we talked about the importance of communities of faith engaging in this work around voting. And as I mentioned, Texas is finishing up our early voting period today for our primary runoff election that's on Tuesday. So talk to us some about why faith communities should prioritize issues related to voting.
Yeah, it's really easy for me to connect the dots on the importance of democracy, but I know that many of our faith-based partners they're sort of bread and butter issues, and really networks as well. We look at it, as I mentioned, issues of poverty, feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, the basic gospel tenets, right? But democracy, that is the nuts and bolts of our political system and the way that our society organizes itself, the way that power makes decisions, and all of that trickles down. So what we try to do at Faithful Democracy is to connect those dots for our partners about how issues like lessening gun violence or care of creation or protecting the safety nets so parents can care for their children and sick people can get treatment. All of these issues, and we've seen in the last 10 years, we're not going to make a lot of real and meaningful progress until we are able to repair the underlying systems that make those decisions and the people that are representing the decisions that are being made and the basis upon which they are making those decisions. So as one of my sort of favorite go-to lines as a Catholic sister is that living in a secular democracy, a vote, which is sort of the basic building block of civic engagement, the vote is the closest thing that we have to a sacrament in a secular democracy. So, and that is to sort of impart the importance of that very basic idea that you have to vote at a bare minimum, right? That is the bare minimum. And that is the expectation. That is the core of civic engagement, and who we elect is going to determine how we care for the common good. I would also add that in this environment with COVID-19, there is also what could be called a pro-life overlay to the idea of voting, because the decisions made around how people vote, the options they're given, the individual circumstances of voters, how vulnerable they are to COVID-19, all of these become life and death, potentially, policies, right? So it adds a whole nother layer of the importance that voting takes on from a faith-based perspective.
You feel like you're getting more reception to conversations on voting now because of the pandemic? Or is it making it harder because it's, what do you think?
No, I think part of the irony of it, it makes me a little bit sad, but I also see it as a huge opportunity, is that voter suppression has been happening since voting has been happening. And since the Shelby ruling in 2014, it has, we've seen just exponential growth in barriers that have been put up by states for people to vote. And as we know, it typically impacts communities of color, marginalized communities. And it wasn't until it potentially impacts everyone across the board due to this global pandemic that people are really starting to wake up to the fact that our democratic systems do not sufficiently protect the right to vote anymore.
So one of the things you wanted to promote is the Voters Covenant. So what is that and why is it important?
Sure. So thanks for bringing that up. I would say the Voters Covenant, so as we're building the Faithful Democracy Coalition with the long-term goal of some really comprehensive, bold reforms to our democratic systems, the Voters Covenant is the foundation really for building our coalition. We are asking organizations, faith-based organizations, congregations, now at the state and local and regional levels as well, to endorse the Voters Covenant. And that is sort of that's how we bring them into the coalition, is having them listed as one of our endorsers. And the Voters Covenant is really a principles document that we have written up that gets to the moral lens of how our democratic systems manipulate power and representation. So we have tried to frame the ways that it is currently working in an immoral fashion, and that it's a call and it makes the case for these bold and comprehensive reforms. So that's the Voters Covenant, and I will let people know how to endorse that at the end of the podcast, I'm guessing.
Sure, or if you're on a roll, go ahead now.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So at this point, we are building our website for Faithful Democracy right now, so this will change. But at this point, we have it housed on our Network Advocates website. So the landing page where you can find more information about Faithful Democracy, how to endorse the Voters Covenant. There's a form you can fill out to become one of our endorsers. It's at www.networkadvocates.org/Faithful Democracy.
You caught me quiet because I was writing it down. Sorry, I guess I should continue.
No problem. There's nothing wrong with a pause.
So what work needs to take place now to ensure that we have a safe and fair election this November?
Well, you alluded to it earlier. The first thing that is of the utmost import at this point is getting some federal funding to support some emergency COVID response funding allocated to support state and local election officials in preparing to have the election in November. There are so many things that are needed, and the timeline is ever shrinking. So it is, I can't stress the import of having that response package pass with the needed funding by the end of July, before Congress goes on to their month-long recess. So that's first and foremost. But for the folks listening, who I'm assuming would be residents of Texas, formerly a resident of Texas, I would suggest really first lobbying your governor, Governor Abbott, to try to make as many options as possible available to voters come November. Texas is uniquely challenged, I'll just say, in removing some of the historical and less historical barriers that exist for voters. And I think Texas is one of 16 states at this point that still require an excuse to absentee ballot vote. And that is unnecessary, it's unacceptable. Governor Abbott has a say in these decisions, and other things that you should lobby your governor for are things like having online voter registration. There's no reason that can't be the case. To proactively mail out absentee ballot application forms to all of the voters that are eligible. To have extended early voting so you can lessen the crowds at polling stations, and also to recruit and hire poll workers, because there is looking to be a shortage of poll workers come November due to the demographics of your typical poll worker tends to be over 60 years old. And then on the local level, my suggestion would be to proactively reach out to your local election official. These people generally, all they want to do is have a successful election. By and large, their hearts are in the right place. They want to enable people to vote. That is the entirety of their job, right? Is to administer these events so that they function well. And building a relationship with your local election official can help learn what the needs are, because they're going to be unique often to each jurisdiction. And also there are, especially if we don't get funding from the federal government, this is going to need to be a pull yourself up by the bootstraps operation come November, and it's going to have to be all hands on deck. So in any ways that voters can help facilitate the administration of elections, talk to your local election official, be a poll worker, for example.
Yes, especially one of the things we've been talking to congregations about is the fact that so many, and my apologies, this is what happens.
No worries.
It's fun. Podcast working from home is the dogs bark at the mail person. So we've been encouraging congregations to recruit younger poll workers, since so many are over 65 and might be scared off by a pandemic in November. So that's certainly something that everybody can be doing right now. In addition to calling the governor, you talked about Congress taking up the stimulus bill. If you were calling your member of Congress from Texas right now, what might that call sound like? What's the ask?
Let's target Cornyn. I am calling today to impress upon Senator Cornyn the urgency of providing emergency funding to our states and local jurisdictions so that they can carry out a safe election. We need $3.6 billion to be able to support all of the needed preparations, like expanding early voting, expanding voting by mail, which is absentee ballot voting, expanding online registration, making that available to everyone, providing poll workers with the safety equipment and the sanitation that they need for poll stations, as well as things like space to store and process all of the paper ballots that are anticipated to come in on November the 3rd. So funding and leadership to tell states how to use that funding.
Right. So that's short term. Do you have any other longer term goals for democratic reforms that you'd like us to be thinking about?
Most definitely. So the November election, while Faithful Democracy was already sort of had an eye on voting rights and election security, now with COVID-19, it is all focus on the November election so that we can have one that is meaningful. But our ultimate goal, which I alluded to with the Voters Covenant, is really much bigger and much broader than that and much deeper. The reforms that we are looking for, there was actually a report that was released earlier this month, I think, by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences called, I think it's Our Path for a Common Good, Recreating Democracy, something along those lines. And it's really a values-based report that was released. It's nonpartisan, and it looks at different reforms that would help our democracy function in a way that lives up to the ideals that were laid out by the founding fathers. Not that we have ever lived up to that, but we can come way closer, right? And we always strive to live up to those ideals. So these are reforms that also are, many of them are reflected in a current piece of legislation that is stuck in the Senate graveyard right now that is called the For the People Act. So HR 1 is really this omnibus. Some people compare it to the size of the Affordable Care Act. That is this bold and comprehensive reform package that gets at ethics in government, corruption in government. It gets to representation, gerrymandering. It looks at campaign finance reform so that you can have small donor matching funds. It looks at all kinds of voting rights provisions that would just tear away the barriers that exist in so many states at this point. It also provides the flexibility for states to make it easier for people to vote based on what their circumstances are. And the For the People Act really is the closest thing to a legislative package that would represent the kinds of reforms that we fully intend to be pushing the 117th Congress. We know already that Pelosi has committed to make it her top priority. We know that democracy reforms resonate with Americans across the aisle. Nobody is happy the way that our current democratic systems are functioning. And we'll see if we have a Senate and a president come 2021 that are open to making real reforms to fix the underlying systems of our nation.
Wouldn't it be so great if it was easy for everybody to vote in a safe way?
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward. And I would also say, getting back to how am I doing? And when I talked about the prospects of rebuilding, I really, the passion that I feel about faithful democracy and the voice that we can lend to that advocacy, it is a very diverse group. The multi-faith realm is very diverse, and it's recognized as that, right? And so to have the moral lens along with the diversity of voices come together to push rebuilding, really, our democratic system of representation and power is a very powerful prospect that I think it gives me great hope.
Nice. Well, that's good, because you brought up hope, and maybe you just answered the next question I'm going to ask, but it is such a rough year this year, and I know there's stress with the pandemic and everything else going on. I've been asking, especially our religious leaders who come on over the course of the last month or two, what gives you hope in this trying time? Anything else you'd like to add to that?
I think I've been thinking a lot about the redemptive spirit in general. And I saw Hamilton for the first time last weekend, which
I did the same. It was great.
The hype was for good reason. I can't stand hype, and it was right. It was.
I will say my 4-year-old wasn't a big fan, but I loved it.
Not even of the King.
He got tired of the singing about 3 minutes in and went to the other room. So
yeah. I'm not a huge musical fan either. So the fact that I was that into it was a statement in and of itself.
Right. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No worries. I'll always talk about Hamilton. And I think it had me thinking about the redemptive spirit and also all of the civic unrest that we've been seeing, and really the beautiful, surprising aspects of how people have come together to try to take redemptive action to try to change things for the better. That's what our nation was founded on. And that is, I feel, at the core of what it means to be a person of faith, is to, that's the Paschal mystery, right? Is the redemptive spirit. How do you rebuild? How do you build better? How do you bring about a new creation? To use a Christian lens for it. I can't help but think that what we are seeing right now, all of the things that we are seeing, which is really unfathomable, are leading us to something. And I believe, as a person of faith, that it is something better, and that we will likely have to move through a world of hurt to get there. But I have trust in our redemptive spirit as a nation.
Yeah, and I think those listening can play an important piece in helping us get there, right?
Everybody has to.
We all have some work to do in this. That'll preach. That was a good word. You've given me some hope, so thank you so much. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything else that you'd like to shamelessly plug today?
I would just, I don't think so. I would love for any faith-based organizations, groups, advocacy partners, congregations, all faith-based groups that would like to be a part of what we are building, and would like to be invested in fixing our foundational systems so that we can rebuild better. And it's our Voters Covenant. Come on board, join the team. We are still lots of moving parts, and we're still in the building process, but I anticipate it's going to be a very exciting and hopeful ride.
Well, keep us in the loop on the Voters Covenant. We'll be happy to share that link. So folks who are watching, keep an eye on our social media in the next couple of days, and we'll get that out to you. Sister Quincy, thank you so much for the time today, and thank you for the incredible work and ministry that you're doing each and every day on behalf of all of us there in Washington, D.C. So thanks again for all you do.
It's been a real treat to be here. Thank you for the gift of all your work in Texas, for holding down the fort. My heart still lives there, although I might never move back. But it's very heartening to know that there are folks like you keeping up the good fight.
All right. Well, we'll have to find an excuse for you to come to the great state of Texas sometime to hang out with us. So, friends, awesome. Friends, thank you all for tuning in. That's a wrap on today's episode. We'll be back with you next week. We hope that you will share this content with your friends and networks so the influence of mainstream Texans of faith committed to justice can continue to grow in the coming years. Make sure that you smash the subscribe button on wherever you're listening to the podcast and invite your friends to do the same. And remember that this work is supported by members like you, so make sure that you and your congregation are members of Texas Impact. You can join by going to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, we know that these are anxious times, but the world needs the faith community active and engaged now more than ever. So let's get to work. Thanks, friends.
Amen.